How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Today on Culture Architects, I'm pleased to welcome John Bollman. John is the Chief Human Resources Officer at the Pella Corporation. Back 100 years ago, way back in 1925, Pete and Lucille Kuiper invested in a company that manufactured kind of a curious new kind of window screen that went by the name Roll Screen. And then the following year, they moved the company to their hometown in Pella, Iowa, which is where the company's headquarters remain to this day. In the last century, Pella Corporation, which you may know better as Pella Windows and Doors, has cemented its status as an industry leader, not only in the innovation and design side, but also through the company's evident commitment to community, diversity, and intentional care for its people. Pella is consistently recognized as a top workplace, most recently by Fast Company as a 2025 Best Workplace for Innovators, by Forbes in 2024 as one of America's best in-state employers, and also by Newsweek in 2024 as one of America's greatest workplaces for diversity. So it's a pretty impressive company. Well, that kind of success doesn't happen overnight. And in fact, for Pella, it only took 100 years. And so we're excited to have John Bollman with us today to share the company's culture story. So John, welcome to the Culture Podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It'll be I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I'm curious, I know that you have a background that you've worked for some other very large companies in the human resources area. So where in your career did you get this sense of, this personal interest in leadership and culture? Because I think I read that you have a legal background as well. Is that right?
Yes, I am a recovering lawyer.
A recovering lawyer. It's good that you're recovering.
Yeah. I actually happen to be a labor and employment lawyer, which is why there may be the connection, an obvious connection with human resources. But my answer here is going to be a little bit unique in terms of where I got the interest and the focus on leadership. And it goes all the way back to where I went to high school. So I went to high school at a place called Culver Military Academy. All right. Culver Academies, and maybe something, a school that people should look up, but I happen to be biased. I believe it's the finest private high school in the country. But here's the point. The school has a very intentional focus on leadership and character development. And I had a chance really to learn what it meant to be a leader way back at that point in time in high school, which was important to me and helped as I continued on with my career and really began to have an appreciation or understanding of what great leadership looked like. Now, culture is a different point, honestly, David.
They're closely related, though.
Yeah, it's exactly. You learn more about culture based on different organizations you're a part of in terms of what is a good culture and maybe, a less than positive culture. And I began to have more of an understanding or appreciation of culture because of that. And of course, an understanding of the impact leadership has as it relates to really ensuring you have the right culture in place, if it's important to leadership, of course. Right. Yeah.
So when you started as an attorney, labor and employment attorney, as you said, did you ever work purely for a law firm, or did you immediately go into working in the corporate world in HR functions, running the labor and employment aspect of it?
No, I actually began working in law firms, initially a small criminal practice law firm of all things, but then two large national law firms, and then ultimately went into Whirlpool Corporation as an in-house labor and employment lawyer.
Okay. I just coincidentally, I have a brother-in-law who did the exact same thing. He was a labor and employment attorney, ended up getting hired by a large company they worked for, and spent the rest of his career in HR roles at very large companies, but has that same background. So your first company that you went to, when we talk about labor and employment, there's an aspect, you go into an HR type function as a head HR professional, and you're looking at a lot of different aspects of human resources. But culture isn't necessarily the first thing, at least to me, that would jump out, especially from a labor and employment attorney's perspective on human resources. So where in there did you start to say, this culture thing's pretty important?
Well, so the first company I went to was Whirlpool Corporation, and this is back in 1990. So I'm more advanced in my career at this point in time. And I will tell you that I certainly did not appreciate or understand really what culture was all about when I first got at Whirlpool Corporation, because culture is something you experience, something that it becomes more and more evident as you remain with an organization. And as I was at Whirlpool for 19 years, and during that course of time, there was a lot of really good work around our values and the impact our values had on driving our culture. And certainly there was positive, performance and results, I think probably that came, because of just how we did our work at Whirlpool Corporation. But the bottom line is I really began to appreciate and understand, culture then, particularly as I look back on the experience at Whirlpool. And the one thing that really struck me and has struck me for years is Whirlpool has been a great source of talent over the years, either growing up within that organization or going out to other companies. And I've thought a lot about how the culture and the experience they had as leaders at Whirlpool positioned those people to go into other companies and likely, frankly, be an attractive candidate to bring into those companies, but also likely having an impact on how effective they've been as they've gone into those leadership roles.
Interesting. So as you think about Whirlpool and you think about how it sounds like how committed they were, I'll use that word, to culture. My experience is, and I'm curious if this matches yours, but my experience is it almost always starts at the top. Like I always tell people, culture is not an HR function. It's a strategic leadership function. And if you don't have somebody at the top who says, this is a priority for us, especially in a large organization, it's pretty hard to have it work well. So I'm guessing, and you can tell me if this is true, but I'm guessing at Whirlpool, whoever the founders were, the senior leaders said from the beginning, this is important to us. Was that your experience?
Interesting. I wasn't close enough to know, to be candid with you, because you're growing up within an organization. My last role at Whirlpool was leading human resources for the last 8 years for North America, which was the largest business unit at that point in time, got up to be about 12 or 13 billion. But so at that point, I was beginning to see the impact leadership was having on culture. So there's no question about it. But, and this is going to lead maybe good or bad into the story on Pella, but a former colleague of mine was also a top executive at Whirlpool Corporation, actually leading the commercial part of the business, Tim Yagi, and he came here to Pella to be the CEO. He came in to be Pella's CEO in 2016. And I said to Tim way back when he left, he left a year or two before I did. I said, someday you're gonna be a CEO of a company, and maybe I'll come work for you. Well, one thing led to another, and here I am working at Pella. But the real important part of the story here is, and this is before I got to Pella, and I want to make that perfectly clear. But Tim came in understanding how important culture was. And he actually brought together the entire leadership, a large body leadership team at that particular time, about 80 to 100 people. And they went through an exercise to define the culture of Pella at that time. But then because Tim was putting in place a very intentional growth strategy, then the question became, well, what should the culture be in order to help us be successful and execute our strategy? And I really wanted to convey that part of it because I think it's the most obvious example of leadership really that I've experienced now that I'm here at Pella Corporation, of leadership really taking the time to appreciate how impactful culture can have on the success of an organization, and how if you integrate culture and strategy, that by itself can do an awful lot to drive the success you're trying to drive with your strategy, the overall performance of the organization.
So I'm finding it interesting, your comment that Tim comes in as the CEO of a 100-year-old company and is defining the culture. And I'm surprised to hear that, only in the sense that you would think if it's a 100-year-old company that they have a pretty well-defined culture by now. So what was Tim walking into about the Pella culture, and what caused him? I know you said that he was implementing a growth strategy, so that was some of the impetus for maybe working at it more, but was what was defined a couple of years ago of much of a departure from what had been there for 100 years? Or is it just more of a clarification of it? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So this is back in 2016, thereabouts, when Tim came into the company. And at that point in time, you had the years that followed from what started in 2008, and Pella Corporation, was a strong company within the industry, but wasn't necessarily distinguishing itself and taking a lead within the industry. And Tim had a very strong belief that you need to grow if you want to be successful, if you want to take a company where you want the company to go. And of course, you think about the fact that Pella had been in business since 1925, and Tim comes in 2016, and they're looking to get to their 100th anniversary and take it beyond that. And from Tim's mind, we need to put the right growth strategy in place. But he understood something that I'm not sure all the leaders fully understand, which is you have to think about the culture you have in place and how that integrates with your strategy to help you deliver where you're trying to take the company. And so, Pella was not growing at the level. The overall point, David, is Pella wasn't growing at that point in time at the level that we needed to. And it was important to make sure that you not just only had the right strategy in place, but in the right actions that would emanate from that strategy, but how significant culture can be as part of that.
So in 2016, when Tim starts to really work on that in a more significant way, was there an existing set of values that I would assume for 90 years before that, 91 years before that had been in place? And how much of a departure was what Tim and team crafted from that?
Well, there was certainly a strong culture in place, and it was really anchored in this notion of being a truly caring organization and what it means to have that sort of environment for all your team members. Remember, Pella got started in 1925 by Pete Kuiper in order to bring great jobs into the community of Pella where he lived. Okay. And that is an element of really caring. So that was a big part of the culture. But what they did, David, is they used a model that I think had been developed by a Harvard professor, and it had these different words that describe the culture, 8 different words. And at the point in time, Pella's culture was described as caring, but then it also had safety and order. Safety would be you're probably a little bit more deliberate and cautious, maybe risk adverse in terms of the sort of decisions you made and the actions you took. And order would be more process focused. I'm oversimplifying this for our purposes. But then the question became, well, what should it be? And the decision by this 80 to 100 set of leaders across the organization. And an important point here, this isn't while Tim is driving the process, he is not dictating this is what the culture needs to be. This leadership team defined the culture together. And so the decision was we needed to remain anchored in caring, but be a learning organization. And learning means that you get decisions down to the right level. You empower your people. It's okay to fail forward and learn from it, but then results focused. And that's an important element. And you can see how that aligns with driving the growth strategy, because ultimately you have to deliver the right results in order to be able to honestly care for your team members and care for the communities in which you have your different operations working in.
Yeah. I sometimes, as I hear you talk about that, what it makes me think about is I sometimes in the talks that I do for CEO groups talk about the difference between what I call a good culture and a high-performing culture. Because they are different. That when many people hear the phrase, we have a good culture, often what I'm hearing from people is, oh, I love it here that, there's no accountability. We have pizza every Friday. We can bring our dog to work. This is a great place. Right. Well, yeah, that's nice. But if we're not getting results, does that really matter? And to be clear, in my experience, at least, you can't get a high-performing culture if you don't care about your people, if they don't feel valued, appreciated, recognized, all the rest. But the goal isn't to have them all feel good. The goal is to get results. That's what we're trying to do. And those are distinctly different things.
Exactly.
So as I'm picturing this process of Tim is leading this group of 80 to 100 leaders, and they start to define what it would look like, or what it needs to look like, let's say it that way, for Pella to really have a growth strategy and the kind of culture that is necessary for that to take place. So they define this set of values. How did that then get deployed through the organization? I mean, it's nice to have a nice list on a website somewhere, but obviously that has to get operationalized in some way. So how did they take what they crafted and start to operationalize that?
Sure. So I wasn't here at the time, but I'll tell you, what I know, and then I'll tell you about the things we've been doing going forward, if that's of interest.
Yeah, perfect.
But if you start with back at that time, the starting point is you got 80 to 100 leaders in the organization working together and all getting aligned on what the culture needs to be, and taking the time when they're together, and then afterwards to make sure that we were very clear on what we mean by being a caring organization, what it means to be a learning organization, what it means to be results focused. And then it's a question of making sure that you are, as you're leading and managing the organization, you're staying consistent, with what you're really describing as the culture that you need to have in place. So out of it comes a cultural manifesto that gets distributed. Out of it comes different discussions that happen and cascade across the organization to describe what we mean by the culture. And then there's an example of just the behaviors that start at the top of the organization that clearly indicate to the organization that you're living that culture. I mean, one example of something that was happening, and I began to experience when I first joined the organization in 2019, is Tim would put in place what he called a leadership agenda. And that was basically the most significant strategic priorities that the organization was going to focus on in any given year. And whatever team, individuals and teams that were focused on those strategic priorities, they would come in and go over their progress on those strategic priorities in front of the executive staff. But we would invite people from around the organization to come in and sit in and listen to the discussions that were taking place. And by the way, in some of those discussions, just take the learning part. Well, it's important to embrace the red. So for example, if something isn't going well, if you're using the stoplight color approach, it's red. Well, why is it red? And then you indicate why it's red. Well, okay, what are we learning from it? What are we going to do about it? And if you have people in the organization that are listening to some of that discussion and seeing it in action, that it's okay to indicate that, hey, it's not working out. We're failing on this particular initiative. Okay, what are you going to do about it? No one's getting mad. No one's yelling. We are having a good conversation about how are we going to address that situation. And that's just, one example, but there's other examples that have been happening going forward as well, which I can speak to you like.
So talk about that. So now you joined the organization in 2019. You're already familiar with Tim from your previous life at Whirlpool. And so he brings you in to say, all right, we got to keep this thing going. What are some of the things that you do today to help promote that, the Pella culture?
Yeah. So there's a number of things. Obviously, I indicated we have this manifesto we put in place. We actually began to put that in place when I first got into the organization, distributed out to the organization. We have the right conversations, with people that are joining the organization. By the way, when new people join the organization through an orientation process, obviously we're going to talk about the culture. I obviously have a strong belief that during the course of an interview process, people just feel and experience, what's going on here at Pella. A lot of us actually talk about the culture during the course of the interview. Frequently, when I have a conversation with an individual that came into the organization and talk to them, hey, how's it going? 3 months later, 6 months later, a year later, what they will invariably indicate to me is, so it's exactly what I was told, when I was coming in. So that's it, just giving, that particular example. But we actually have just one really good example. We have a leadership summit, every year. We bring together the top leaders of the organization. This year, we're going to have about 100 together. In the past couple or 3 years, it's been a couple hundred people together for 2 or 3 days. But we spend significant time in those sessions on culture. For example, last year we got together and we actually had done a survey in advance with the leadership group to find out how are we doing as it relates to our culture, because one of the important points is you have to keep working it. And so we got a lot of great feedback. We had this great facilitated discussion by myself and a colleague of mine who I'll briefly make a comment on in a moment. So we facilitated this discussion, with this group of leaders, and they were sitting at different tables, and we had them, cohort discussions and feeding back to us. And we had a lot of good input in terms of what was going well and the things we need to focus on and improve. And again, I want to go back to the point I made earlier, which is if you're doing that with the leadership group and you're talking about the things that we need to address and improve and the expectations we should have as leaders to really ensure we have the right culture in place, then that's going to have a huge impact. The fact that we do that and then we make sure we're getting out to our respective organizations and taking that same sort of dialogue, to the broader organization. As part of the work we did last year, we actually identified 6 different accelerators of our culture of again, being anchored in caring and learning continuously and achieving results that go beyond. And those accelerators include things like what it means to be courageous and what it means to be accountable and what it means to be resilient. And we think these are 3 examples, and there's 3 others, by the way, but I'll use those 3 for now, because do you think those are important things for us to focus on in order to continue to drive what we're trying to drive with our culture going forward? And so that's good. We're going to actually, Leadership Summit is this week, David.
Okay.
And we will start this Leadership Summit. The first 2 hours will all be on culture. And I don't know how many other companies do that.
So I want to come back to this accelerator thing in a moment, but just for our audience's sake, to give a sense of context, roughly how many people work for Pella?
We have over 10,000 people, probably between 10 and 11,000 people, given the latest acquisition.
Got it. And how many different locations is that spread across?
20 manufacturing locations. We've got a number of sales subsidiaries. We have an independent Pella dealer network, which is independently owned, which is one of the ways to go to market. But we're all over the place, all over the States. Effectively a domestic company with some business in Canada.
And it's still privately held, correct?
Yes, sir.
Got it. So come back to this accelerator thing. It's a word I haven't heard before used as it relates to culture. So tell me what you mean by these 6 accelerators.
Yeah, the intention here is we want to make sure that we're continuing to put all the focus we need to on culture, because we understand how important it is to our success and our ability to execute our strategy. And so we think that we need to put more focus. I mean, the word accelerator is another way of saying to us as a leadership team in the organization, we're going to put more and more focus on culture. So that's really what we mean. But if I take an example, take courageousness as an example. Okay. We're anchored in caring as fundamentally one of our 3, pillars of our culture. And caring can mean lots of things to different people. Obviously, you want to care for your people. You want to build, that trusting environment, for all the team members within the organization. But caring also means that you can have, you need to take the opportunity to give very strong and direct feedback to team members if they're not performing at the right level. And that may not always seem like you're caring, but indeed you are, because what you're trying to do is get that individual to understand if they're not performing where they need to perform, what do they need to do to take their performance to the level that we need them to take. Courageousness can also mean, hey, think boldly and take risks. Let's, in order to continue to drive our strategy, we have to be bold with some of our decisions and some of the choices we make out there. So that's important for us as well. And again, that's an example of being courageous. And again, those both of the examples I give you fit within our culture of caring as well as learning and results.
Right. And that's where we'll pause part 1 of my conversation with John Bollman, Chief Human Resources Officer at Pella Corporation. I had just asked John about the 6 accelerators that Pella uses to strengthen its culture and how caring, learning, and results all come together in practice. When we come back, John connects the dots between culture and business performance, shares how Pella's focus on leadership drives results, and offers a few of his lessons that he's learned over his long career. So stay tuned.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.